Welcome to the Center for Sports Studies podcast. My name is Brandon Podgorski, professor of sport management at Trine University, and I want to welcome you to this week's podcast. On today's podcast, I am joined by veteran PA announcer and sports radio talk show host, Jim Shovlin. For over the past 15 years, Jim has called the biggest high school, college, and professional games in Fort Wayne, while also hosting his weekly talk show, Talkin Sports, with Jim Shovlin. In this episode, Jim talks about his preparation for PA announcing and his show, how great announcers speak from the chest, and how creating goofy character sounds during a baseball game landed him his first radio gig. I hope you enjoy the show. All right, joining us on the Trine Center for Sports Studies podcast today, we have the great Jim Shovlin. If you're from Northeast Indiana, that name is certainly going to ring a bell with you. PA host, radio host extraordinaire. Jim, welcome to the show.
Well, thank you, Brandon. It's great to join you.
Well, I'm excited to have you here. Obviously, I get to work with you every week, and that's been a lot of fun. We've been doing that for the past few months with 1380 ESPN, The Fan here in Fort Wayne. But today I wanted to bring you on because we do have some students who are interested in getting into a career in public address announcing, in radio. So you would be the perfect person to talk about all of this stuff. And I just kind of want to start off first because you've had a career in radio and you've been doing PA, I know, for over a decade. So just tell us about your background in sports radio and in PA work, how you got started and what you're doing now.
Okay, well, it all started, accidentally. I happened to play adult baseball with the general manager of Federated Media, Tony Richards. And we were actually practicing one day on a Saturday out at Shove Park and just hit batting practice and what have you. I'd catch a ball in the outfield, I'd throw it in, and I do character voices. I've got about 1,000, but only one of them's good, But and so I'd make a certain dialect or a certain voices. I'd throw the ball into him, and then same thing with him. When he'd field one, he'd do a voice. And anyway, at the end of practice, he just kind of made the remark, and this will tell you how long ago this was. He said, "We've got to get you on tape."
Okay.
I thought, yeah, sure. And that was a Saturday afternoon. Monday morning, 8:05, my phone rings, and it's Tony. He says, "Get in here." He says, "We want to put you on tape." And I thought, you were serious. Okay. So I went out to Federated Media on Maples Road and got with Steve Brailsford, and we did some of my character voices. And then, it was just a couple days later, I got a call from them that they said, "Hey, come on in. We want to talk about you doing some call-in bits for WMEE and the Charlie Butcher Morning Show." Now, Charlie Butcher's been a radio icon in this community and throughout the state of Indiana for many, many years, and passed away in 2018. But so anyway, we talked about it, and we did this couple of bits that I would write and then phone in, and I got all of $10 an appearance for that. So but I took it. I thought, hey, I don't care what you pay me, I'm on the radio. This is great. So having no formal training up to that time, I got started. Then they called me in, a few weeks later and said, "Hey, we're adding someone to the morning show. Would you be interested?" And I said, "Sure." And they go, "Well, we've got a couple other candidates too." And I'll come to find out they didn't have any other candidates. They just want to put me through the process. And so I started. I was actually working full time with city utilities in the water industry. And from that point in time, I was the night operator at the St. Joe Dam, which pretty much meant, that I struggled to stay awake all night and just sat there and watched the pumps do their jobs. And so I get off at 6 a.m. and head out to Federated Media, get there by 6:15 and start my day with the morning show as to what they have me do. And that was either, giving away CDs or tickets to a concert or doing dumb and goofy stunts. And just for the listeners, and of course, I didn't have the nerves or anything like that, because Charlie used to say that, he was broadcasting to his 7 loyal listeners. Well, shoot, I believe him. not to realize that there were 30,000 listening. So,
Uh-huh.
but I got started that way, and then of course became a full-time employee of Federated Media when the general manager saw me in the hall one morning and says, "Hey, have you ever thought about a sales job?" And I thought, "No way, I've never done sales." He said, "Well, I think you'd be good at it." And he said, I said, "I have no training." And he said, "You don't need, we'll train you." So he did. I left my job at City Utilities and embarked on a sales career that I'm still doing to this day, 23 years later. But through that, and that was with News Talk 1190 WoWo Radio. And I sold there for 5 years. That was quite an experience and taught me how to sell, how to listen, and they had some great mentors along the way. So they also knew that I was quite the sports geek. So they had a show on WoWo every night from 6 to 7. It was called Sports Talk. And it was Art Salzberg and Dean Pantazzi. Dean Pantazzi was a sports director at WPTA at the time. Art Salzberg had been at WPTA, but he was in sales with WoWo as well. And they'd been going at it since 1985. Here we are between 15 and 20 years into the program. So they were taking time off at such time. So they asked me to fill in from time to time. And I was scared to death because I grew up listening to this show and just listening and just banking on every word they said. And so with that, I was able to be part of that show, and that was quite a thrill. And then it just kind of went from there. I was asked to sub in more and more, and then they actually, when Dean Pantazzi left, they asked me to replace him. So that was my start in broadcast radio, with sports radio. And my gosh, I wish I would have had formal training. Oh my goodness, I wish I did, but I didn't. And I made it work. I never had one lesson. But then just to look back, I had so many people that were mentors at the time that would answer my dumb questions that I had because I wanted to be good.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew that I wasn't at the time. So I wanted to be better each time I opened up a mic. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. But that was my start in radio broadcast. My public address career started kind of from those beginnings because then my name got out there a little bit as being one of the co-hosts of Sports Talk. And I also then, by that time, was working full-time in the sporting goods industry at Sports Center in the village at Coventry. And they handled high school team apparel, spirit wear, whether it was high school, collegiate, some of the pro teams would come in. And Joe Updegrove, the Homestead High School athletic director, came in one day and said, "You do broadcast, don't you?" I go, yeah. And he said, "You ever done PA?" And I said, "I have not." He said, "Well, we're looking for a PA announcer for our girls basketball team." He said, "You want to give it a try?" And I said, "Sure, yeah." I got off work at 6 and they'd start games about 6:30. And yeah, sure, I can do that. So I did, my very first PA game was JV girls basketball at Homestead. And then the varsity one that followed. But I did a couple of those, and then he came back and asked me, he said, "You want to do boys too?" So I said, once again, sure. I have trouble saying no. But I did that for a while, and then caught the attention of University of St. Francis, and they asked me then to do PA for some of their basketball, men's and women's basketball. And so I did that, went from high school to college, and it was about, maybe one season into the basketball, the athletic director came around and asked me if I wanted to do, Cougar football. Sure. Brandon, I'd never done football in my life. And didn't know how to or anything. But here I was the PA announcer for the St. Francis Cougars, and yeah, well, I'm still doing it, and it's been 14 seasons, so they tolerated me at first, but that's what I've done, and then got to know people throughout the sports industry locally, especially. I started, doing other things as well. So those were kind of my beginnings, if you will, of broadcasting and public address.
Amazing how all that started off just by making goofy sounds playing baseball.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
And just, we talk about this with students quite a bit. When those opportunities come, say yes. And you may not be qualified, but hey, it's going to give you a chance to figure it out. And what was that learning curve like for you? Both, we can say radio and PA, probably starting with radio, getting in there and not knowing nothing. And maybe that works. Maybe to your point, that worked as an advantage. Like, I don't know, I'm supposed to be nervous.
Yeah.
So how did you learn to, kind of hone and refine your craft there a little bit?
I was kind of mentored early on by Chris Didier, who was the music director for WMEE when I came on the morning show. And, he told me something that lives with me today. He said, I listened to you this morning, he said, and you sounded kind of monotone. He said, you have to project from the chest. You have to project from the chest. And so I did, and I learned that. And from then on, it was great. And he would kind of listen and critique, and but he always had something positive to throw in there as well that kept me going. But he was a big influence on me as far as how to speak properly, I guess, in there. I still have well, right there, the uhs and ums and things of this nature that still will populate my verbiage. But then I'll listen to other broadcasters, and they do some of the same as well.
Yeah. And do you have to do the same thing? Are you kind of conscious of that when you're doing PA work? Like, does your inflection change with your voice? Are you a little bit more maybe aggressive on the mic? Like, how do you kind of attack game day?
Well, as far as being on the mic, I have to command those in the arena or stadium's attention. And so I have to talk, once again, from the diaphragm, from the chest, and project so that they hear this important announcement, whether that's who the ball carrier was, who made the basket, what time the fish fry is, on Friday night, things like this. So, you have to command their attention early.
So on game day, and I've gotten a little bit behind the scenes on this with you, just talking through you. How do you prepare? Because you've done high school sports, you've done college sports. I mean, you were the Mad Ants PA voice for a number of years when they were in Fort Wayne. So what's kind of like a normal game day look for you as you're preparing to do your PA work?
Well, obviously preseason, I need to know the home team's names and pronunciations, and that is so important to get the pronunciations proper. Giannis Antetokounmpo had brothers in the NBA G League, even as he was arriving on the scene. And when you first see the name Antetokounmpo, there are several different ways it can go. But it was, that's one of the big things. And if I'm doing a game, regardless of the sport, I'll try to get a hold of the visitors roster maybe a day or two in advance, and just kind of take a look and see if there are any testers as far as the players, even the coaching staff for that matter, just in case that's necessary. But I try to do a little bit of prep. See, let's say if it's in basketball for the G League, in fact, I would always check and see who's their leading rebounder, who's their leading scorer, who commits the most fouls, and just get to know that name and number. And you're not always going to commit that to memory, but still, at least with the home team, if you can memorize name, number, and pronunciation. That's great. But you want to maybe get started a little bit before that. Now, game day, I should be ready by that time. And I just make sure that I've got I don't really need any notes, but I've come up with, let's say in basketball, I've come up with my own score sheet that I would use where I would already have the home team typed. And of course, in the NBA G League, there was a lot of movement. So even the home team, let's say at the time, the Mad Ants, we had a lot of roster changes, adds, deletes, and such. So, but then the opponents would send their information, their media kit to the opposing team. Usually 3-4 days in front of the game, and I would get a hold of one of those and kind of take a look around. But you can't be too prepared. Regardless, you can't just walk in, sit. I guess you could, but are you going to give it your best effort that way? Probably not. So, and if someone gives you the incorrect information and you say it, well, you're the idiot, not the person that gave it to you. They're in the shadows somewhere. You are putting yourself out there. So, but that's the big thing, just to prepare, look over rosters and know the rules of the sport you're doing as well. So that helps.
Yeah, I imagine that's got to be a big piece. You actually have to know something about the sport that you're actually announcing. And how do you kind of strike that balance between giving people the information they need to know? So we'll say, for example, for football, okay, number 12 carries the ball, is tackled by number 59, and not trying to be a play-by-play guy. Like, is there kind of a balance there on things like, hey, this is what we kind of do, and then some of these other things, we don't necessarily need to talk about every single thing that happened on the play?
Right. Yeah, I've never done commentary like, that outstanding run was made by number 1, Cam Peterson, tackled by number 2, Joe Smith. Now, basically the home team will have the ball, 1st and 10 on their own 29-yard line or something like that. So, that's all the information I'll give. I won't embellish things like that. Now, I might get a little more excited for the home team, or, just to be honest, whoever's signing my paycheck is who's going to get just a little bit extra. Now, ironically, I had a high school playoff game, a regional championship game I did recently, and it was between Leo and Bishop Dwenger. Ironically, I went to Bishop Dwenger, used to coach baseball at Bishop Dwenger. Now I coach baseball at Leo, and I have my stepkids that go there as well. So, I was kind of, I had to remain neutral, because in the IHSAA playoffs, you must remain neutral regardless of where the venue's at, and who the home team is. So I was hoping that I would do that, and I feel like I did. Just try to remain neutral and give out the information. Give the people in the stands what they want, who the ball carrier was, who the tackler was, maybe what the down and distance is. And at the end of each quarter, some do, some don't, but I give the score. So
I got to imagine you're kind of like an offensive lineman in a way. If nobody says your name or talks about you after the game, you probably did a pretty good job.
That's exactly
on the mic.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. Yes. Unless the PA announcer is too bombastic or wants to be too much of a part of the game, then you'll hear about it.
Yep. So as you think back in your career, you just talked about one that was pretty memorable, but what have been some of your favorite memories, both as a PA announcer and on the radio?
I guess some of the funnier moments, well, let's see, probably one of the first ones in baseball, I was the PA announcer for the Fort Wayne Wizards for 4 seasons. And eventually then when they became the Fort Wayne Tin Caps, I was the PA announcer for the Fort Wayne Tin Caps for just a couple of months, because then WOWO Radio offered me the sports director's position when the legendary Bob Chase retired. And Bob hand selected me to succeed him, which was one of my biggest thrills in my life. To succeed Bob Chase, the legend. But anyway, I was doing PA for the Wizards, and it was maybe my second game, and they were playing West Michigan, And I was looking at the roster and, of course, going over pronunciations. And there was a relief pitcher for West Michigan. His last name was De La Cruz, which, fairly common, but his first name was Euglio. Euglio. And the West Michigan radio play-by-play guy said it's pronounced Eulogio. Okay. Eulogio. Okay, got it. And sure enough, in that game, in about the sixth inning, he gets up in the bullpen to throw, and then he's quickly followed by another guy, a guy with a lefty. And so anyway, it's like they make the call to the bullpen. Pitcher comes in, does his warm-ups, coming out of the West Michigan bullpen, number 17, Eulogio de la Cruz. I nailed it. That was all great and everything. I happened to look in the newspaper the next morning, saw the box score. Yeah, the relief pitcher was Keenan Rons. He was the other guy that was warming up in the bullpen. So I was so worried about goofing up the pronunciation. I got the complete wrong one. So, that was one of them. Just some other, some antics. Things we had a guy that was at the Memorial Stadium location, we had a dot matrix video board, and so we needed someone to run that, as well as so we had three guys in there, myself as PA announcer, we had a music guy that played all the music, and then our dot matrix guy was very quiet, and the music guy he and I got along pretty well. And so all of a sudden, toward the end of the season, I get a Post-it note, and Tony was the name of the guy that was the music guy. And I get this note on a Post-it note from the dot matrix dude. I look at it and it says, "I have zip tied Tony to his chair. He doesn't know it." I look over there, and sure enough, his belt loops are zip tied to his chair. Unbeknownst to either one of us that this had happened. And of course, then a couple innings later, when Tony tried to get up, the chair came with him, and it just, it was probably one of the loudest, funniest things ever. But but there in basketball, I was doing color for the Fort Wayne Mad Ants with the great Bill Hazen, who had done games. He did the Chicago Bulls radio broadcast when Michael Jordan was a rookie. And
Wow.
So I'm with the Bill at the Coliseum, and we're getting ready to start the game, and down swoops a bat from the rafters of the Coliseum, and all 10 players were on the floor ready for the tip, and all 10 players scattered like there was a swarm of bees or something. But that was funny. And then, of course, Bill and I did some commentary on it at the time about, when Mad Ant came out and thought he had it in a net, and he didn't. And it is on YouTube as well, Mad Ant's bat game. So, that was rather unique and kind of funny as well. But yeah, there've been so many other times. I've had the great fortune to PA the NBA preseason game of the Indiana Pacers against the Charlotte Hornets at the Coliseum, and that was my first professional game prior to me starting with the Mad Ants full time. And that game itself sold out in, gosh, probably about 20 minutes, I think it was, when they had tickets available. And ironically, there I had to give pronunciations from both teams because it was preseason, and they still had a lot of players that never heard of. And Charlotte had a lot of European players as well. And so I looked over and I thought, I got to get these Charlotte pronunciations. So I look over and there's one coach sitting on the bench. And so I thought, well, I got to do it. I got to ask him. So I walk over to the Charlotte bench, and it's Patrick Ewing.
Wow.
So I said, "Hey, Patrick, I'm doing PA. Can you help me with these pronunciations?" And he goes, "Well, I'll try." And so he listed all the players that weren't there or weren't playing that night. And we were able to, slowly discern, okay, it wasn't all that bad. but most of the guys that had difficult pronunciations weren't going to be on the court that night. So, but I got to talk to Patrick Ewing, so that was pretty cool.
Well, that's kind of the cool part about sport. I mean, there's not many probably opportunities when you were working at the dam that Patrick Ewing was going to come in the office and you guys were going to be chatting, right? And that, that's just kind of one of the benefits. And, we've talked about that too, but, thinking about today now, you've been in radio. I mean, you talked about doing a tape, a long time ago. Media has changed so much. Radio has changed. It feels like, there's much more emphasis on digital. How has sport media changed with the new technology? I don't know necessarily from the PA point of view, but as you think about radio, how have you seen those changes kind of take place over the years, and how are they affecting the industry, maybe either good or bad?
Great question. Social media obviously has made it much easier to get information for content. However, there has to be several different layers of verification that goes with that as well, because as you know, all you got to do is misspeak one time and the avalanche begins.
Yep.
But I mentioned this sports talk radio program that was on WOWO. Art Salzberg had a deal worked out, and he was a tremendous salesperson anyway, but he had a deal worked out with his bosses that he would go and have his lunch at the public library, where he would read the newspapers of all the regional big printed newspapers, the Chicago Tribune, Indianapolis Star, Detroit Free Press, Cincinnati Enquirer, in addition to both of our newspapers, and get regional information each and every day. He didn't have the ability to just go to Twitter or wherever he wanted to go to a Peegs.com or something like that and get his information. And so that's social media has made it so much easier. And at the time, Brandon, when I started Talkin Sports, it was actually, I was working at Sports Center. A gentleman came in from a radio station in Bluffton, Indiana, WNUY. His name was Scott Menser. He came in and he wanted to sell our bosses some radio advertising. And I said, well, probably not going to happen. And he took my card and said, oh, are you the guy that was on WOWO Sports Talk? I said, sure. He said, well, I'd like to start a sports show and be local in content. And I said, okay. He said, would you do it? And I said, well, I don't know much about Bluffton, Indiana sports.
Mm-hmm.
He says, oh, no, I want to market to Fort Wayne. I said, well, let's talk. Yeah. Because I've been a sports nut since as long as I can remember, and I'm pretty old. So we talked, and it was one of those cases where, yeah, okay, and I was driving 70 miles round trip for a 1-hour show down in Bluffton, but I love doing it. And so that spawned Talkin Sports. He said, the content will be yours. I said, what are we going to call it? He said, that's up to you. So I took sports talk and just reversed it. And at the time, though, there was nothing on the radio that was local in nature. There was, ESPN radio or, whatever it was. I think it was the Game maybe by that time, but there wasn't anything local other than your newscasts at 6 and 11 that gave you about 2 minutes of the world of sports. And so at the time, Ken Horman used to have a show called Sports Wise, and that left the air. And so there was nothing going on that pertained to local sports. And I always thought, and that was back in the days, and I hope maybe some people remember the name Deshaun Thomas. He was the Parade All-American basketball player at Bishop Luers High School. And I mean, he was so well coveted. He had a press conference in his middle school to announce his high school choosing, And so, but he was phenomenal. All the state championships they won with Deshaun. But they were more than just Deshaun. They were, Lawrence Barnett and the Sword Kid. There were other players that were good who would have gotten notoriety had they not played aside Deshaun Thomas, who, my goodness, everybody wanted to know what his exploits were, and he'd give them highlights every single game. And so he was very worthy of it, but then so were the other guys on the team. And that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to highlight maybe the second leading scorer, maybe the lunch pail guy that goes out and works hard. And those were the people. I wanted to name some names of high school and collegiate athletes that were doing extremely amazing things and going above and beyond. I wanted to make sure that they got their due, especially those, and also coaches, staff, the volunteer assistants, those people. I wanted to make sure that they got the recognition that they so richly deserved but weren't getting, and that's not why they would have done it. But I still wanted to recognize those people for doing what they do, because they are the ones, a lot of times from the coaching realm, that sustain these sports that we're able to play.
Well, I think that's what's so much fun about, co-hosting or producing Talkin Sports with you on Saturday morning. So people can tune in AM 1380 here in Fort Wayne, or 1380thefan.com worldwide, is that with your knowledge of local sport, you're able not just to give the scores and the result, but you're able to kind of drill down and talk about the people who are involved in things, excuse me, and with, such a great local sports flavor here in Northeast Indiana. I mean, we got so many high schools and minor league teams. I think that's important, and it's something that kind of binds us as a community. And I think people really enjoy listening to that. I know we're running a little bit late on time here, but I did want to ask if you had any advice for students who'd want to break into radio work or specifically PA announcing. What advice would you give them to break in and get started?
I would say to approach anybody and everybody that needs PA work handled, or if there's a radio station, especially in a radio station, go and apply for a board operator position and tell them you will do anything that is available, and be honest about that and be true to that as well. There are several people I've seen come through radio stations over the years that started out as board ops, but then would do anything asked. And now, in fact, there was a kid in Bluffton the year that I did the show down in Bluffton, and his name is Robert Connett. And he used to have to be driven to the station by his parents because he was only 14. Wow. But yet he produced my show and was my co-host. And then he got a job at Federated Media, did the same, went to Norwell High School, took the TCOM. He went TCOM in, I think it was Ball State, and then put his name out there. And now I believe he is doing work for University of North Carolina. And, he's once again started out in some of these sports that aren't the biggest revenue producers, but now he's getting into that. There's a gentleman by the name of DC Hendricks. He was at Federated Media for quite some time. He came in and just applied, and I told him, I said, just be available to do anything they asked. And he was right place, right time, because one of the co-hosts didn't show up one day. They asked him to fill in. He filled in as co-host, did such a great job. They went from there. But there's always, as you know this so very well, Brandon, there's podcasting that can be done. There's online web hosting that you can do hosting shows and things of this nature that you can cut your broadcasting and radio host teeth that way too. So, but there's a lot. But just be prepared and be available for anything that's put in front of you, even if it doesn't seem real glamorous right now. And oftentimes it isn't, but I've been doing Talkin Sports in January. It'll be 16 years. And sometimes I've had, I have to be the salesperson because I have to buy the time from Federated Media each and every week. And I have to get sponsorship that will cover that. So I'm the salesperson, but I'm also, content creator. And I always, I look to you then, if you have any content, if you have any people that you would be interesting add to the show as well. So, I mean, we work well together, and I love the fact that you've been able to just adjust your schedule to be available. That's great. So, but yeah, there's just be prepared and be willing to do anything asked of you.
Well, I don't know if we have the best show, but certainly I think we have the most fun. I have a blast doing it every Saturday morning, and we got the best hair in the station as far as I'm concerned. So
we do.
But he is Jim Shovlin. You can check him out on Saturdays, 1380 a.m. The Fan here in Northeast Indiana. You can check him out on Twitter at Talkin Sports, TalkinSports, no O, 1380. The voice of Indiana Tech Warriors basketball, the voice of the Cougar, University of St. Francis Cougars. I'm sure I'm missing something there, but if you're in Fort Wayne for any amount of time, you will run into Jim. So there you go. But Jim, thank you so much for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Thank you for the opportunity, Brandon.
Thank you for listening to our podcast. We will take a break over the holidays, but be sure to check out our social media pages for our next guest in mid-January. As always, we'd like to say a special thank you to producer Josh Hornbacher for his work behind the scenes. This is the Center for Sports Studies podcast, broadcasting from the Trine Broadcasting Network. If you like this episode, please be sure to subscribe to the Center for Sports Studies podcast on your favorite podcasting platform and give us a 5-star rating if you like what you heard. For more information about the Center for Sports Studies, please visit trine.edu. Also, be sure to like the Trine Center for Sports Studies on Facebook, follow us on Instagram and Twitter at Trine CSS, and subscribe to our YouTube channel.